start. Okay, so now we'll go into something that's no code and a bit more fun. Okay, so how do we design a website? To address this question, I think a better question to ask is, why do we design our websites? And in the center of any website design is our users. So we design a website to serve our users. We want our website to be usable, and two core concepts we consider as a website designer is UI and UX. UI dictates the visuals of our website, so it's the initial impression that our users get when they come onto our website and interact with it. And UX describes more of the user flow as our user goes from page to page as they interact with our website. So a good UI UX is a UI UX that delivers the content and functionality of a website to its users well. But this can take a lot of different forms. There's no one good recipe to make a good UI UX. So first, we'll take a look into user interface, or UI. Your UI should be led by a design guideline, and this is specified by the fonts you use in your website, color palettes, the spacing and layout, and maybe the reusable components you use in your front end. So here's the design guideline that was used for many years on the WebLab website and our slides, but recently we had a UI change on our website, so you might not see this UI format on the website anymore. But as you can see, in this UI guideline, we specified the fonts we use for different text throughout our website and the color palette used throughout the website. So the fonts and colors that you use can give off a very strong initial impression of your website to your users. So they're very important, and you should definitely take some time to think about what fonts and colors you pick for your UI guidelines as you design your websites. So first, we'll start off with fonts. So if you're an MIT student here, you have access to the Adobe Creative Cloud, and that allows you to use Adobe fonts. So this is the Adobe Fonts website, and you can add any family of fonts to your web application or download any fonts. And I really recommend it. It's a great tool for finding fonts for your website. You can filter by tags for maybe different fonts you're looking for. And so this is the front page of Adobe Fonts, and as you can see, these different fonts give off very different impressions already. So I just went ahead and wrote down maybe my initial impressions of all these fonts, and I'm sure that you have different impressions of these fonts as well. Like for Ivy Style, this is a very modern and clean font, and you might want to use it for a very modern user interface. Whereas for Mini, Arcade, or Limon, you might not want to use those for your body text of any website, and those might be more suited for a heading of your website. So same thing for colors. This is coolers.co, and it allows you to pick color palettes and edit color palettes. And similarly, colors also give off a very strong initial impression to the user. So I also went through this and wrote down my initial impressions. And you might have similar initial impressions, maybe not. But yeah, that's one thing to consider. And yeah, here are some tools you can use on Coolers. You can pick palettes and adjust the palettes. And another thing to think about is color psychology, which you can look through on your own. So the impression so as we just saw, UI can give off a very strong impression to your users through fonts and colors, but this depends largely on your user base. So your users will change throughout time and throughout culture. So yeah, UI trends change over time and vary across culture. And now we'll take a look at some examples of how it does that. So here's the MIT website in 2003 versus now. So as you can see, the MIT website moved towards a more minimal UI. We have a white background now instead of the teal and green background. We have more spacing for the words so that there's a more minimal and empty layout. And we also replaced text with icons where possible. So overall, we see a trend towards a more minimal UI in the past decade. And a great example of how we can see this shift is by looking at how icons change over time. So here's the trash can icon. And icons were originally introduced in 1973 when Xerox introduced a graphical user interface. So in the very beginning, we have very primitive and pixelated icons. And as we move through the dot-com bubble in the early late 90s and early 2000s, we moved towards skeuomorphic icons, which were originally designed to be very user-friendly because they mimic how these icons might look in real life. But as we move through the 2010s and in the past decade, we have more minimal and flat UI icon layouts. But recently, I think we're starting to move away from the minimal UI, as a lot of icons now have more shadows and maybe some dimension added to them. Here's a cool website you can check out on your own time. So you might want to see how your favorite websites have changed over time. This is the Web Design Museum. So as we just saw, we've been moving towards a more minimal UI, but the minimal UI isn't preferred by all users in today's digital age. One example of this is how the UI for web design varies between Western websites and maybe some websites in East Asia. So this is the Yahoo front page, and on the left is the English Yahoo web page that you can log into in the US, and on the right side is the Japanese Yahoo front page. So something really interesting is that Japan's UI more mimics how websites in the West looked during the dot-com bubble, and it's a lot more cluttered. There's no central focal point, and it's a lot less minimal. And this is because across culture, users have different needs. In the West, users prefer a more simplistic layout with major focal points that summarize the information, whereas in East Asia culture, they're high context cultures that prefer more information that tell them more about a website. So this really brings home the point that you really need to consider your user base when you're designing a website. So how do we make our own website's UI look good? As we mentioned earlier, you should use UI guidelines because this provides consistency throughout your website. So here are some tools for you to pick colors and typography. And another important point is to reuse components. So one thing you can use is the UI component library. Here's an example of a component library that I like. It's called Mantine, and it allows you to customize your components and reuse them throughout your website. Another important part of making your UI look good is responsive design. And this means that your website will look good on all devices of different sizes. So one thing you can do to check how your website looks on screens of different sizes is by using inspect element and changing the dimensions of the website. So for example, here's the weblab website. We can go to inspect, and on the right panel, on the top left of the right panel, you can toggle device toolbar and pick dimensions. So here's how it might look on the iPhone SE. As you can see, everything resizes and it still looks good on a small screen. So this is what we call responsive design. Stanley, yeah. So just a quick aside, interactivity is also really cool. Interactivity is when a user can interact with the website, and maybe when you hover around or click on something, you'll get a response back. This is cool, and it makes your website really catch someone's eye, but there are drawbacks, and it could take away from usability or be very resource heavy on your browser. So here's an example of an interactive website designed by our co-pres Stanley. So as you can see, we went through a recent UI change. With the new UI, it's a lot more interactive. Like, you can hover over things and they'll change colors or opacity, or you'll have an emoji, I don't know. Really cool. But yeah, our old website didn't have any user interactivity at all, so it's a lot more eye-catching on the new website. Another example of interactivity is for Hack MIT, we're working on a 3JS website for our upcoming high school hackathon blueprint. I don't know if you guys saw that, but oops. No, it's gone. But we use a 3D modeling app to make this cool room. Why is it gone? Oh. And it allows the users to play around with the room and click on different items in the room. And on the right, it was just a cool portfolio page that I found where you can interact with the different objects on the website. So now we'll go to UX.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Annabelle. Wait, I think you should stay connected to yours for now. Okay. I'm going to talk about UX. I'm going to speed through it a bit because I think Sophie covered a lot of the really important points in her UI section. But really quickly, basically, UX, we want to consider things like how intuitive is navigation going to be for our users, what cues can they use on the website, how visible are the essential elements that we really want to highlight on our web page, and is the information that we're presented in like a logical manner where it's organized in a way that users can easily understand how things are flowing. So let's take a really quick poll. Between these two ketchup bottles, 1 and 2, which one do you think better optimizes the UX for users? You can do like 1 finger for like 1 and 2 for 2. Yeah, I'm seeing like only 2s. And this is correct because basically, like you can see in the old Heinz ketchup bottle design, it's really unintuitive to use because like if you have ketchup left over, you're like digging at the bottle to get the like leftovers out. Whereas here, you're like able to squeeze it much easier. So it very much prioritizes user experience. And we want to do the same thing with our web applications. So we want to use symbols, concept, and colors that are commonly understood across different cultures. Earlier, Sophie talked about how UIs can differ between Western and East Asian like applications, but icons are kind of universal, and we can use like specific symbols that most people can understand to mean certain things. For example, you can look at the icon bars here and see like the home page is like represented with a house, the search bar with a magnifying glass, etc. And there's also a lot of colors, like green is symbolizing like money usually, or things to deal with like wealth. So just more on like the color psychology that Sophie kind of mentioned earlier. So this is like a good ideal ratio to have like 60% of a main color, 30% of a secondary color, and 10% of an accent color. There's also like studies that show like which colors are more preferred by like different genders. And also like this website below, Contrast Checker, is really good for making your website accessible because you can check to make sure like you can play with your website on grayscale to see if it's still visible to like people who are red-green colorblind, and also like that you have enough contrast for people who might have like issues with like vision, that it can see all the colors appropriately. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Discord's UI, but one of the ways that Discord optimizes its UX as well is by having the buttons really centralized and very easy to click, so you know exactly like what your options are upon entering the web page. So this was Facebook's old UI, and as you can see, it was like pretty unintuitive because the create an account boxes are like super large, which is like not great because like most of the time users are not going to be creating a new account. Instead, they're probably going to be logging in, and the login is like really tiny at the top here. So that's like super unintuitive, right? So we want our information flow to be really like easy for users to digest and understand. So this is why Facebook switched to their new UI, which is like very clean, very nice. We have the login front and center, and then create new account below that, which is like much more intuitive, right? Because we're probably not going to be creating a new account every single time. Okay, let's talk about wireframing now. So this is super important for your guys' projects. So if you're tuning out, you should pay attention now. Basically, wireframing is just like creating a super rough draft of your web application. But it's very helpful because once you hard code things, it's going to be more difficult to change than if you have a clear idea of what your application is going to look like before you actually start the coding. So you want to focus on the overall structure of what your application is going to look like and where key elements are going to go. So you can see here in this example, right, like they have the sidebar, they know what their nav bar is going to look like, and they know what sort of tabs and pages they want on their application. It can be very drafty, doesn't need to be anything formal. Just think of it as like a rough draft mock-up of what your website might look like. So to make a wireframe, we have several different options. We can use Figma, which is what we're going to be talking about later. You can also honestly just make one on Google Slides, which is nice because you can show transitions between different pages. You can just draw it on pen and paper or any other wireframe software like Photoshop or Sketch. But we're going to be using Figma because it has something that can be really helpful called prototyping. So prototyping is basically where you're just taking your wireframe and you're bringing it to life. So you're going to add like interactions to your wireframe and like show which pages go where, which basically helps improve your UI because you know exactly like the technical requirements needed to code it and what should go, like where users should be redirected to. It can be very similar to the real thing. As you can see, this is like a very good prototype that includes all the interactions like scrolling and redirects and things like that. So we're going to be using Figma because it has really good like real-time collaboration as well as options for prototyping and adding interactions to your wireframe. So it's very helpful for our purposes, and also I think it's very intuitive for beginners to use. Okay, so we're going to transition into a Figma demo or mini workshop. Basically, I'm gonna go over the steps of like where key things are, and then you guys are gonna get some time to play around with it on your own. I know we don't have like a lot of time, but hopefully I can speed run, and then you guys will get some time to try it on your own. I don't know. Yeah, you can wait. There's still slides like on Figma. PC1. Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically we all remember, oh, can we see the slide? So yeah, okay. We all remember Catbook, and this is like if we were to create a wireframe for Catbook. So we're gonna just go through that really quickly. So you guys can follow along with this step right now. Basically, you just wanna make a Figma account at figma.com, and I already have my account, as you can see. But what we're gonna do is we basically once you get to the Figma homepage, you wanna create like a new file. You would just click like create file, create new in this corner right here, and then you're gonna select design file. I'm just gonna use the Catbook wireframe that I already created. But basically, upon creating a new file, you can also open this cheat sheet for reference if you need any help or get stuck on things. Is weblab.is/Figma cheat sheet. So just some like quick basics. Everything in Figma is kind of organized into layers. So you're gonna see like on your sidebar that you have like your different pages, and then your elements are all gonna be shown there. Canvas, this center part, is where all your stuff is gonna be shown. Tools at the bottom. So this is showing like Figma's old UI. So right now tools got relocated to the bottom. And then on the right hand side, you have like options for selecting additional things, which we're gonna go over later. But I think the tools are pretty intuitive, so I'm not going to go over them in depth. But basically, there you have like move and scale options. You can make frames, you can make shapes, you can draw with like the pen and pencil. You can also do text, and you can leave comments, which is why it's really good for collaboration. Okay, so the basics of Figma is everything is going to be kind of contained in a frame. So let's start by making a frame. I'm just going to click here, and then you can see you can choose different like devices for your frame. I'm just going to choose like desktop, and then let's do like MacBook Pro 14-inch. So here's our frame. A frame is a container for elements, and so this is going to house everything on kind of like a page of our application, right? So I'm sorry, did this. But frames are very, very powerful. So if you guys have used like any image creation software before, even just like PowerPoint or Google Slides, I'm sure you probably are familiar with grouping items or objects. But instead of grouping objects for Figma, I would recommend you to just make a frame every time you want to group objects, because it's much more powerful than grouping objects, because you can size everything within the frame independently. You can also have like cool overflow content options. So that allows you to take advantage of like clipping text, and overall, it's just better for if you want to apply like consistent styles to everything. So let's make Catbook's homepage. So for Catbook's navbar, I'm gonna do a frame right here. And then you can change the fill here. So you can see I'm changing the color. The hex code is 2B73FF. So this is like gonna be our navbar frame, right? And then we can drag text inside of it. So text is at the bottom on the tools here, and we just want to write like Catbook. Oops. Yeah, and then you can like resize as you see fit on the side, like how big you want your text, what font, etc. I'm gonna go over all of it right now because I think you guys can play around with it on your own. But one of the key things about Figma that's really nice is, let's say we want to make a profile page, right? Like, would we copy and paste our navbar over to our profile page? Like thumbs up if yes, thumbs down if no. Yeah, I probably wouldn't be asking this question if the answer was yes, right? So we're going to reuse it instead as a component. So you can see here, I have conveniently already done it. But basically, if I go to like the frame that we were just on, and I click on it, I can right click and then I can do create component, which will essentially create a reusable instance of this navbar element for me. So if I go to my assets, I've already made like a better looking navbar component here. And so this is the one that we'll be using. But basically you can like create components which are reusable instances of stuff that you want to reuse across multiple pages, like your navbar, for example. So now if we want to make a profile page, instead of like remaking our navbar or copying and pasting it, we can go to assets and then we can just like insert instance here. And so we can get like another navbar basically. Yeah, so that's how we would reuse our components. And then this step is pretty intuitive as well. You're basically just copying and pasting images. You can shape things by going here and then you can change like the radius. So this is how I made it like rounded. You can review the slides more on your own time. But basically, when you edit components, when you edit the main instance, it's going to change all other